Hello, everyone. My name is Xiomara Angel, and I serve as the Strategy Manager for Post-Secondary Access here at Alabama Possible. I am the moderator for this session. Thank you so much for joining us. This breakout session is called Redesigning Purpose to Increase Dual Enrollment and Credit Using System Thinking, and it's focused on the conference theme of creating a purpose-filled culture and climate and policy advocacy and collective impact. Our presenter is Dakota Paulicki from Civics Lab. His bio is published in the program. We do have time for Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the Zoom chat. When you do exit this session, you'll be asked to answer a brief survey that will appear on your browser. So now I will pass it over to Dakota.
Hey, thank you, and thanks everyone for joining me and sticking with us after the lunch break. I hope it's been a great morning for you all. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to level with you. What I have to share with you today is probably like a half day, if not of a full day's worth of content. It is a deep body of work that has been going on in rural Nebraska with Civic Lab. And so there are some things I'm going to go quickly through that I'm, of course, happy to touch on deeper at a later time. Some things I am going to kind of linger on, but by all means, I do have the chat in front of me. So if you have a question along the way, as was said, please throw it in the chat and we can get addressed. But if you're noticing some things where I'm kind of going through quickly, know that that's by design, so we can make sure we get to some other key parts. I'll just start sharing my slides here and we will kick it off. As was said, I'm Dakota Paulicki. I'm a director at Civic Lab. Civic Lab's a nonprofit a nonprofit institute based in Columbus, Indiana. And we help places solve complex social challenges. A lot of the work we do is in the education space, education and talent space, including being the home for talent hubs and the National Talent Network. We're very fortunate to be a longtime partner at Alabama Possible. But a lot of times we do get called in to help people apply systems thinking and systems change methodologies to really complex social challenges. And that's one of the cases that we're going to talk about today, is how we use some systems thinking tools as well as some qualitative data and insights to actually change and redesign processes to increase early college enrollment systems. And in order for me to really tell you about this, I have to bring you to the place that this work is taking place, which is a town called Norfolk. Now, I know it looks like Norfolk if you're from Virginia, and it might sound like Norfolk if you're a northerner from Illinois like I am, but in Norfolk, they pronounce it Norfolk. So if you ever get there, make sure you pronounce the R. Otherwise, everyone's going to know you're not from around there. Norfolk, Nebraska is about 2 hours outside of Omaha. And it's a pretty rural region. And in fact, this particular college's area serves that entire catchment area, including up into South Dakota there. So it's a very, very large region, over 30 counties, many school districts, but a rural community in many, many ways. It also happens to be the home of Johnny Carson. So when you're there, you can snap a little selfie with one of many murals dedicated to Johnny Carson. Nestled in this community is a pretty big and important institution, Northeast Community College. It's the only community college in the region. They have some satellite campuses, of course, but Northeast Community College serves the normal role that most of our community colleges serves, including running early college programs. And they have a variety of early college programs. I'm not going to get into all the different types they have. They have special Friday sessions. They have traditional dual credit, dual enrollment. They have all these different kinds of things going on. So all this is kind of lumped into an early college conversation. And we were working with Northeast Community College on a program as they were implementing guided pathways. And during that time, they said, listen, we did something a while back and we found that we've been having this interesting problem. We made early college free to any student in our entire catchment area. Again, about 30 counties, a very, very large area. They had made it completely free for anyone to attend early college. And yet enrollment hadn't really been increasing. And they had some hunches about why. And in fact, they had even commissioned a report from a different organization at one point to come in and figure this out. And yet nothing had really changed. And so as they started talking to us, they said, Dakota, we really think this is an area where we need to do more authentic stakeholder engagement with our partners. And so where do we begin? And this is part that I'm going to go through quickly. If you know Civic Lab well, we go deep in a lot of these areas, and I'm always happy to revisit on this. But the very first thing we had to do is to build a guiding team. Now, a lot of times what happens is that, you retreat to your own organization, you get some folks together, you ask this question, and maybe you do some new things. But they acknowledge that they needed to actually bring in their partners. And the principle behind this of that guiding team is that if you want to improve a system, you have to make it everyone's responsibility to improve that system. In other words, the schools are going to look at the college and just say, fix this, fix this. And if the college doesn't say, well, listen, it's going to take all of us to fix this, then you're not going to really get very far. Also, transforming any system is actually about transforming relationships. When we talk about systems change only happens when you actually transform how people and organizations relate to one another and how they interact with one another. Policy, programs, funding, those are outputs of a system. The system itself is actually a series of interactions between people. So we had to build this guiding team that was composed of, guidance counselors, school principals, people in the college itself to really come together and say, how might we improve enrollment into early college? The second thing they had to do is get a process. A lot of places leave collaboration to chance. And if you leave your collaboration to chance, you're leaving your outcomes to chance. And so we said, we really need to get a process because redesigning a system is that social process. The process is the product itself. And that's really what Civic Lab specializes in. And I'm going to just touch on this very briefly. But what you're looking at is the stakeholder engagement process. Civic Lab was founded 13 years ago in Columbus, Indiana, which is an 85-year living laboratory for cross-sector collaboration. And in Columbus, they've just been doing this work. They call it the Columbus Way. So Civic Lab was created to discover and then document that process and then teach it broadly to other folks. And really what the process is, it's this relationship-based systems building approach to really addressing community collaboration to solve complex social challenges. And very quickly, as I'm going through this, I just want you to have in your mind a change process that you might have been a part of in the past and ask yourself, how is it different from this? So once you identify a key community issue, in this case, it was how might we improve enrollment or increase enrollment for early college, we have to identify the key relationships that most shape that question, and then determine who is already doing what, who are they doing it with, and how is success being measured. This is where we identify that guiding team, for example, when we build larger groups. Then we get into the why of things. We understand how the system is currently working. So we're going to spend time today really digging in how we figured out the why. Only after you have a firm understanding of how the system is currently functioning and why the system is producing what it's producing, do you actually get a chance to co-create solutions. And here we're asking ourselves, not can what this partner do or that partner. We're saying, what can we do together that we could not do alone? And what relationships do we need to improve and reshape? What new relationships can really change the way the system is functioning? And once we co-create those ideas, then we actually implement them. We have some redesign. So we gave them this process. And it's really important because they had acknowledged that we really need to move just from the Northeast Community College people doing to our school partners, which happens a lot. A college says, we need you to do this, that, and the other. We're doing it too. Sometimes we even do things for, but they really acknowledge that historically, they haven't really been doing a great job at doing things with their partners along the way. So this idea of the stakeholder engagement process was appealing to them to have actually a methodology, because as the leader of the early college program put it to me, we really haven't been true partners with our schools for a long time. I always point to this man, Edwards Deming, statistician. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you probably don't know what you're doing. So again, the very first spot for us to come into this environment was to say, what's the process that we're going to use to really address this particular problem together? We do have a detailed version of the process as well. So, a lot of partnerships go around this circle and actually like check off the boxes and put dates and things like that. So it's a tool that's available. We're always happy to talk more about the stakeholder engagement process. So I'm skipping over a really big part here because we did do some initial training. We got the teams together. We figured out, this is the process we're going to use. But this is now where we're entering the part where I think it's going to be really interesting for you all who really want to improve, early college programs. And what we did is apply kind of contextual systems thinking. We know that in a social system, context is truly everything. Everything happens in a context. You and I right now are in a context. We're in this digital context of Zoom, where we have video and audio and we're talking to one another. It's a context that's been set up by Alabama Possible in the form of a conference, right? That context is a set of relationships as well. You are also right now in the context, maybe your home, maybe your office. I'm in my context. I'm in my home office here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And my dog's going to be barking outside that door in a minute and all these other things. Everything happens in a context. And yet, when we get into this kind of work, it's our normal preference to remove people from context and try to treat everything as if context doesn't matter. And a lot of times in research, we kind of say, oh, we controlled for those variables, which really means we're just ignoring those variables. Instead, when you're trying to redesign a social system, you have to bring all of that back in and really ask yourself, can we redesign what happens inside of a context to actually improve the system that we're trying to improve? And so we shifted this group at Northeast Community College, this team of schools and community college administrators, to say, what are the contexts that we can do? And we introduced them to one of Civic Lab's tools, the systems journey map. And I'm just going to touch on this very, very briefly. And again, I'm always happy to go deeper in the event that something like this is helpful to you. At the bottom, we say, okay, what are the contexts? Think of a person that you're trying to serve. And it's always better if you can actually use a real person and not a persona or a population. So give yourself the freedom of saying, yes, Dakota. Okay, Dakota is going to be an early college student, and here's who he is, et cetera. Now, what are the contexts Dakota has to travel through in order to achieve, or what context are we creating? Sometimes those are going to be places like we've talked about. It could be at home and in school, at high school. It could be on our community college campus. It could be an after school club in the community, et cetera. Sometimes those contexts are actually stages of the process. Early learning about, the awareness building part of it, actually enrolling and registering, taking courses, what happens after courses, so on and so forth. Once you have those kind of contexts, you then say on this kind of lower bar here, how does the existing system work? And you're identifying specific touch points. How does the existing system interact with Dakota in these contexts? So if it's, the process of awareness and so on and so forth, you might say, well, we send home emails, we have informational nights, we do this kind of thing there. At the school, we give some training to counselors, and we have, sometimes we send our people there, so on and so forth. So you map out how the existing system is working. Then you move on to the next kind of middle column there, which is the redesign system. And the power here is we're not asking you to create anything new yet. Instead, we're saying, look at the existing system. If you were to move touch points around, could you actually change how that system is functioning? In other words, can you take what you already have and build what you need? And so sometimes it's very, very simple to say, gosh, we've been doing this thing over here in this process, but it's be so much better if we moved it back up in the process. Or we have this really great thing that happens only in our schools. How do we bring that great thing out into the community or into a different context that we know people are in? And finally, after exhausting that option of just saying, how do we move around and redesign our existing system? Do you then populate, okay, here's some things that we want to try out. Here's some new work. We're going to try to incubate and demonstrate if that actually works. So we brought a big team together, the guiding team that we have, which is about 9 people or so. They invited about 3 or 4 people. So now we have a group of about 50 people in a room, and we print out these large maps, and they're the size, they're really big. They're the size of a table essentially. Most teams are spread out on the floor, and we give them all these stickies, and we say, okay, we give you this training, then let's map the system. So you're looking at one of the posters that was made. Here at the bottom, they have middle school, high school, on campus, parents, and community. They map out the existing system. They have some ideas of how they want to redesign and some new touch points. I'm not going to get into the individual post-it notes because, as you can see, they are ripe with acronyms. So I don't really know what JAG or PLPs, et cetera, but they do, and that's what's important. Another team kind of looked at it from a different perspective. They're, looking at saying, how are we educating students and parents? How do students access dual credit in particular? How do we support students during those courses? So on and so forth. And again, went through the exercise of existing system, redesigning, and figuring out some new work. Here's yet another group looking at different grade levels. So early grades, middle school, 9 through 12, actually addressing prerequisite courses, and then enrollment and application registration, then actually in early college. So they took a little bit more of that kind of linear approach using time bands as contexts rather than places. And then here's probably the last one I'm going to show you, which is what, learning about early college, application processes, how and what's next. So just pause for a minute. And I know we're not getting into the details here, but you can see already the rich value of the data. There's more than this. We had, I think, 6 or 7 teams do this exercise. And so at the end, we as a backbone team, as a guiding team, are able to synthesize about 50 different perspectives of how the current system is working, what people might do to redesign that system, and what things they're kind of interested in trying in. So it's an incredibly powerful way to already use contextual thinking and saying, how do we just change the context that we're in to actually improve this kind of challenge, increase early college enrollment. And so you might ask yourself, okay, great, Dakota, here's the process, man. It looks like you've done a lot of this. Why? I think we're ready. You've already identified new things that we want to try. Let's move forward. But I encourage you here, the biggest mistake folks make is that they leave the why section too quickly. And instead, we said, hey, you have to resist the temptation right now to jump in to create solutions. One of the major lessons that we learned through that systems design process, through that contextual thinking, was that the entire early college program is entirely dependent on the high school context. High school counselors own whether or not a student is going to enroll in early college, period. It does not matter how much awareness campaigns, how many, Twitter ads and Instagram ads or TikToks, how many letters get sent home to parents, how many college nights they did. At the end of the day, it was entirely dependent that this process required a high school counselor to sit down or encourage students to actually do early college, to recommend them, to adjust their schedules, to allow time in their schedules, and then to actually sit down with every single individual student and have them apply. So that was a huge thing we had to learn about the context. We identified what is the most important context that is adjacent to this, and then how do we redesign that context was our next question. We also had this other question for the college itself, which is, you guys know there's been issues. This is not new. You guys have known there's issues. You've commissioned reports. You've had these conversations. You've been hearing this stuff. You have bad relationships with some folks. You have good relations with others that are very honest with you. Why haven't these things been fixed yet? And so we had to really get in deep about the college as well as saying, what's it going to take for us to really address these things? And so we had to linger in that why section a little bit more. And here's what's next. We decided we needed to collect the voices and stories from the people that matter most. Now, most of the time when you talk to a college or say, our primary audience is our students. We're here, we want to be the best, best college for our students. And that's good and right and noble. But in this particular instance, the people that mattered most to them were school counselors. Because again, school counselors had all of the power in this relationship of figuring out who does and does not get into early college, essentially. So we said, okay, we need to go and collect the stories and the voices of these school counselors as well as some other folks. And originally, at Civic Lab, we're capacity builders. So we don't do a whole lot for other people. We try to get other people to do things. And so we said, hey, we'll build you this protocol. You guys go out and conduct these interviews. But then they said, listen, that's great. We'd love to do that, but we're kind of on a timeline. We have some capacity crunch. Could you please do it? And I said, sure. So I ended up conducting these interviews for them. And as a result, we did winnow it down a little bit. And so instead, what you're looking at here is a brief protocol that we designed. And we were going to interview counselors, early college students, prospective college students, and then parents. Just to avoid this issue of us having to talk to youth, we narrowed it down to just say, I'm going to interview counselors and parents. Now, I know you can't really read this, but the protocol is very, very simple. For counselors, I asked them 4 questions. Let me scroll up here. What information about the student do you take into account when advising students to take dual credit courses? What tools, data, information are most helpful to you in enrolling students? What are 1 or 2 supports that make it easier for you to do this? And thinking about those students who are currently enrolled in dual credit courses, what do you believe is their primary motivation for enrolling? Those are it. That's the 4 questions we asked counselors, half an hour interviews, that was it. For parents, we asked, hey, based on what you know today, what does it mean for your student to participate in early college? What would you consider when deciding if a dual credit course is right for your child? Do you feel like you have access to all the information you need to help your child decide if dual credit course is right for them? And whose advice do you listen to when helping your child make decisions about life after high school? That's it, 4 questions. And so we asked the guiding team to identify who could do this. They identified 47 people, 20 parents and 27 high school counselors. We sent out invites. We interviewed 16 people. So it was 11 counselors and 5 parents. And we had 11 hours of interview data based on these kinds of questions. So the very first tip I want to give anyone who's interested in doing this work is that you should always open up with a non-hypothesis question. Right? Your goal here is to give them a chance to tell you a story, to understand the context, and not necessarily to lead the witness. The other thing I want to clarify very, very quickly here is I am not a qualitative researcher. I am married to a qualitative researcher, and I'm her student all the time, and I was certainly her student through this. That said, if you're not a qualitative researcher, you're not an evaluator, don't hesitate to interview people. There is a difference between big R research that you're going to be published and peer reviewed that you need I or B for and all those things, and talking to people to understand their experience in the system so you can do something with it. And so if you're like me and you're kind of an amateur qualitative interviewer, here are some key things I want to leave you with. Number one, stick to your questions. Avoid leading the person down a particular way of thinking. We see this all the time. People get in, they ask the first question. I know I get evaluated often, and I'll talk to somebody, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I forgot to ask you 5 of our questions." Yeah, stick to your questions. 2, don't take notes. A lot of people we see, they say, "Okay, I'm going to interview some folks. I'm just going to take robust notes and then write a report after that." When you do that, first, you're not really listening to the person anymore as soon as you start taking notes. It's very hard for anyone to do 2 things at once, particularly listening to someone deeply while jotting something down. The second thing is that you've already introduced a layer of analysis. So the best thing to do is to just talk to someone, listen to them actively, and then get a transcript. There are so many free transcription services, very affordable, high quality ones these days. Just get the transcript instead. When you get time to actually code the data, you want to watch or listen to the recording while you read the transcript. Sometimes when you read a transcript alone, you miss out on those important kind of the intonations, the pauses, those kinds of things that don't make it in the transcript. So as you start coding the data, make sure that you're actually watching the recording while or listening to the recording while reading the transcript. I'm always a big fan of allowing the codes to emerge. So I didn't walk into this project with a code book and said, these are the things I'm looking for. You can do that if you're looking for something very specific, but allow the codes to emerge. And finally, when you get to the analysis part, wait to do it. Don't make meaning yourself. Instead, bring that back to your guiding team and make meaning together. So here's what we ended up doing. I'm going to show you one tool real quick. This is Max QDA. If you're already in qualitative work, you might already know this wonderful tool. But if not, I just want to show it to you briefly here to give you a sense of what we looked like. So Max QDA is a pretty powerful qualitative research tool. And what you're looking at is literally the code book for where I put every transcript and every recording. So here are all the people that I interviewed. These are all pseudonyms, by the way, so everyone's protected. I can double click on any of these. I can show you the videos of folks and watch them live. But, for example, you can see here, we mapped them onto the context. Here's post-course, course taking, enrolling, and pre-enrollment, tools and information, what motivates students, and bright spots. Then I have further coding with pain points, ideas for improvement, and success stories. So if I go to bright spots, we can see, all these wonderful things. There was this person named Michaela. Michaela was pretty much a one-person shop, and there's literally a code that says, "God bless Michaela Williams." That's literally a quote that just kept coming up across all these interviews. And so we noted that down for sure. But when we really look at it and you see how many codes we collected, we coded 548 different segments of times that people were talking. And most of these were in the enrolling and pre-enrollment stages. So if we go to enrolling, you could just see how many different codes we are actually using of saying, this is what people are saying. It appears that my screen has frozen. Are you guys seeing this at all? Or has it still been the same screen for a while? All right. Have you noticed any changes on the screen lately?
Yes. Well, on
Yes,
my,
we have.
Okay, cool. Then let's just find this frozen. I'll just keep going. Thanks, everybody. You can see just on the enrolling side of things, we have quite a lot of codes in different areas for improvement, right? And so even if we just say here are all the issues, right, that we can find with the registration process, there's 157 issues with the registration process that we were able to identify. And so very quickly you can dig in. Here, for example, there's 23 times that someone had mentioned that counselors have a lot of follow-up to do to get students through the process. And so if I'm going to click on this, suddenly every interview that I had, every counselor that I talked to that said we have problems and takes a lot of time and have to do a lot of follow-up, here's what all these people are saying. We have to spend hours out of our offices helping these kids register. We want to help, but it shouldn't take that much time, so on and so forth. I also just want to note in some of these that some of these are also double coded. So for example, you see some purple things because of course, as you're talking, people are saying, hey, here's an idea that you could do to make things better. So oftentimes things do get double coded, but counselors have a lot to do. The other nice thing about this tool, I'm just going to feature to you real quick, is actually just looking at the individual documents themselves. So if I was going to look here at what Carmen was telling me, right? And here you're looking at my interview with Carmen. And you can see all along here, this is the actual transcript of my conversation with Carmen, the counselor, and you can see all my codes along the right-hand side here. So as I'm watching through, I'm literally highlighting things and adding new codes. Now, this is all important because this is what what you end up getting as a result of this. So we've gone through, we've done this, and this is literally what I showed the college once we were done. Okay, so I went up to them and I said, okay, we've done all the interviews. We have 11 hours of interview data. We have, 548 coded segments. Here's our code book. But again, we want to make sure we're analyzing the data with the people who are there. And so I told them I wasn't sure what title to title this report. One was they're still high school students. How do you redesign an early college system with that in mind? And that's pulled from one of the counselors, Andrew, that we interviewed. Hey, they're accustomed to the safety of high school, the above and beyond that we go through to make sure that they get through high school itself. The other one I offered them was other colleges are doing this better. How might we be the best early college in the region? And again, this was something that counselors told us, and I selected a quote from Andrew. Our students know that the Northeast process is rather cumbersome compared to the other schools that offer dual credit in the area. Now, the reason I gave them options is because I'm talking to this internal team and I said, you guys know your cabinet better, you know your leadership better. Which of these titles is going to work best for you? They ended up going with a different one called It's Awful, It's Awful, It's Awful. And that seemed to be the one that was most motivating to them. So, and then this is how we structured it. As you can see along the bottom, we have our contexts. And we said, okay, there's 4 contexts: pre-enrollment, enrollment, course taking, and post-course. And then the program overall. And then with each of these, we identified some bright spots, we identified some insights, and we identified some areas for improvement. So, for example, a bright spot about the program overall is that there's this deep and authentic appreciation for the partnership that Northeast has in providing these college courses. Verna kind of talks about it by saying, it's a great partnership. The people at Northeast are really great to work with. I appreciate that there's free classes. I know that you all have been inundated with some of the troubles and hurdles you're trying to fix, but I appreciate you asking me to be a part of it. Why did I select this one as being, well, first off, this whole report was about 150 slides. So again, because we showed them all the data. But I'm only going to show you a little bit of it. I included this one because, again, Northeast College admitted from the very start that they needed to do something different, that their usual way of operating wasn't working. And here was a counselor who said, hey, I really appreciate that you're asking me to be a part of the fix. These people want to help you fix these systems. They want the good things for their students, and yet they usually feel like they're not included in that change. And so there's already an immediate appreciation by a counselor who's acknowledging, wait a minute, you guys are doing something different right now, and I'm willing to spend my time, a little bit extra of my time, to help you kind of do this a little bit work better. I want to just show you a couple other things that we have here. Here's an insight from the pre-enrollment stage. So while parents rely on school staff, when we interview parents, they rely on school staff to navigate the process. They tended to look outside the school for confirmation, affirmation, or advice. So when we asked about, helping their student make plans for the future, all the parents reference things outside the school system. They really sought input from these 3 groups: people who are working in their child's desired field, family members, and then their own experiences and advice. They weighed these over a school counselor's recommendations, over a college's recommendations about what kind of things their child should be doing. And of course, we always back that up with some quotes. Robert is one of the parents. He said, "Hey," he was talking about his son. He said, "Same thing with our daughter." We asked, "Do you know what the process is?" "Okay, you want to become a pediatric psychiatric nurse practitioner. It's a very specific thing. It's a long journey. What is it you want to do? Let's make sure you can really do it." And Robert was actually reaching out to people on LinkedIn, strangers who have these jobs, and said, "Hey, would you be willing to talk to my daughter, who is a high school junior right now, about what your work is?" So Robert was doing that for his own child in a lot of ways. And so it opened up this question about, how do students kind of make decisions? Well, we have to think about the other context, and parents and family are a context by which a lot of students make these kinds of decisions about their future. And yet we don't really engage with that context more. So it opened up a great conversation at Northeast College saying, how do we work more directly with parents and exposing them to our faculty, exposing them to our networks of our people? How do we expose them to other parents to help make these choices a little bit better? Another area of improvement in the pre-enrollment step. When deciding if a student's worthy of early colleges, counselors hold most, if not all, the cards. And I want to say that again, if they're deciding who is worthy of early college. And this was such an important insight. I think I'm going to even hit it on twice, because the college is saying almost everyone is early college. They want to make it completely equitable to anybody who wants to be in. Counselors, on the other hand, since there is no universal policy, the college has a policy of basic admission standards, but every individual school has their own way of determining who does and does not get early college. It was entirely dependent. So, for the college's perspective, high school counselors are the most influential relationship in the early college system, and they had to invest in that relationship. And we're going to talk a little bit more how they did that. They had to also diversify entry points with students. And again, we go back to the contextual thinking. How do you increase the touch points between social, familial, digital, and built environments? And then if early college is for everyone, how do you amplify that message in many, many more contexts? Because right now, if I'm a student in a school and my counselor has a different perspective on what and who early college is actually for, how do I, as a college, help that student say, wait a minute, how do I help you have more agency in that conversation, even though I'm not going to be in that particular school? All right. And yes, Jamie, I completely agree. I completely agree. It's a major issue. And this was one of the biggest things that the Northeast folks even saw coming out of this. One of the other areas for improvement in the pre-enrollment space is that we knew that more support for counselors was really needed. And Beth, one of the counselors, said, listen, when a student comes in the question, we're like, okay, we have to put you on their schedule. And then it's obviously during a tight window of dual registration time. So we'll need them for like 2 weeks straight, every day, all day, to be honest. She was asking for the college to be in her school for 2 weeks straight just to handle all the problems they're having. Now, there are some bright spots. For example, in the enrollment space, when something did go wrong, the college had a really good reputation for being responsive and very, very helpful. Carmen said it best. I'll say that I frequently email. I'm more of an email person than a phone call person. I'll email the admissions and registration office at Northeast, and they're really pretty quick and responsive. That's a great thing for that college to know. But we also had some insights in this enrollment particular area as well. The enrollment process causes significant frustration for counselors. Since the counselors are their primary referral source for new students, their earliest experience with the college is a highly frustrating one. So Lucy said it best. We can't stop because we're changing schedules, because it's the beginning of the school year every year. So we try to get the school year started and register kids for dual credit. It's chaos around here, to be honest. You should see our spreadsheets. And we have an admin assistant who takes over all these spreadsheets, and she schedules things. And, it's better because she does a little bit more time, not meeting with students constantly, but it's mind blowing. It's awful. It's awful. And this particular quote was something that really resonated with the Northeast College folks as well. There's a lot of problems in their enrollment steps. It's cumbersome, it's complicated. It is one of the most resounding kind of criticisms of it. They have to bring 5 people out every time because there's all these different steps. There's issues with students claiming accounts, creating accounts, 2-factor authentication, getting codes wrong. You'd have to register and then wait 24 hours and then come back. Well, that's not what a high school student's life is like. You have to click that, then you have to click it again, and then it comes up to a search, but you're not supposed to do that search, even though it is there. There's a search there. There's a little tab that can mess up. And it's because Northeast is using an enrollment system that's designed for college students, not for early college students. And so there's all these other, particular steps that were going in. We also had a bunch of rabbit holes that we did go down, including the kind of invisible criteria for counselors to use when selecting students. For example, on that very first question I asked, when I said, "Hey, what do you look for in a student when advising to early college?" A lot of them immediately said, "Well, academic performance." I said, "Well, tell me a little bit more." Well, grades, test scores, attendance. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Do they raise their hand in class? Are they a student who is ambitious? Do they have good reviews from their teachers? And so there was a lot of these extra kind of criteria. There was one counselor who's like, "I don't think early college should even be a thing. I think it's an issue that we're pushing so many kids to college. We need more of the trades." So there's a lot of this kind of invisible preconditions as well that came up. So I know I'm skipping over a lot of these pieces because there is a lot of really sensitive and important data that was unique to the Northeast College context. Again, there's a lot of things around just the registration process that had to have happen. And if you have specific questions, I'm happy to dig into them. But here's what I really noticed in the RIM. And again, I'm focusing today on our change process and how they really use this information to change things. The VP for Enrollment Manager said, "Listen, we already knew about these issues. As I mentioned, they already had the reports, but hearing it directly from their partners really hit home. That was something we could only do when we actually collected voices of people." Again, they had this static report that said, "Hey, you have all these problems, you should fix them." But and literally the VP for Enrollment Management, when she heard a counselor, and I played the recording, the counselor saying, "It's awful, it's awful, it's awful." She says, "I'm taking that to my board. I'm taking that to cabinet," because that was a really powerful kind of thing. You know about these issues intellectually, but actually hearing it from someone is a whole different cake, a whole different thing. Their chief technology officer was in this room as well. And he said, "Hey, I really appreciate this process because we really don't know what to prioritize at our college. We get so many tickets and requests for things. It's really hard for us to know where to prioritize our energy. This is a deliberate process we're using to understand how to deploy my capacity and my resources as our CTO so we can really improve this." Normally, it would take them, he was telling me that he has a 21-month backlog on requests and tickets that come into his office. So the idea of redesigning or creating a special early college application was kind of a crazy idea for him because he has 21 months of other things happening before that. So by working with this really intentional process, it incorporates prioritization that he can then go and rally resources around. And he feels like he's, part of a team now rather than just being a customer support center, which is honestly what, again, his words that he was telling me. One of the early college program leaders, it's one of the most memorable times and first memorable time in history, excuse me, might be the first time in memorable history when we've had a real chance to build trust with our school partners again. And for the early college instructors, we found through this work that once students were actually in a course, it was going incredibly well. Completion rates were high, satisfaction rates were high, instructors are happy, students are happy. Most of the credit is transferring very easily, not only to colleges in Nebraska, but other colleges. They had great articulation agreements. So once a student was in the room, actually things are working great. And that was a huge boon because a lot of times the instructors felt like they weren't doing enough. How do they do more to increase enrollment? And they're being responsible. So this kind of qualitative approach and this contextual approach also helps you highlight the things that you're doing really, really well and prioritize the things that you need to address very, very quickly. So there's a couple principles that we used here while using this kind of qualitative data. And a lot of this actually comes from the Cynefin team and Dave Snowden and Anthro complexity work. And it's three things, kind of three levels. One is optimize this granularity, which means we need to get less aggregation and less summary. When I was with the group, I didn't say, "Hey, here's your final report. I analyzed it, and now it's in this executive summary that's only 3 pages long." I gave them 100 slides of quotes, and we went through it. We spent, pretty much a full day in a room together going through the data and making meeting and having lots of conversations. We had to optimize the granularity, getting very, very detailed, right? Second is we distributed interpretation. Like I said, that guiding team was really important. When we're analyzing this data, it wasn't just, the college folks in the room. It was our school counselors, it was our school principals, and we were all there interpreting the same data together and listening to it in parallel, and importantly, without consultation. My job was to say, here's what the data said. And if someone had a clarifying question, I could answer that question, but I did not guide them down one particular way. So it's important to just let people analyze and distribute, interpret that data themselves. And finally, we had to disintermediate the decision makers. This is one of the biggest, I think, gaps in a lot of what we do in the education space, which is that we say, hey, this decision maker, this college chancellor, president, this VP, this board member, whoever it is, we're going to only deliver them, this final recommendation on a couple of slides, and it's going to be in 15 minutes. We said, no, they need to be in this room, and we're removing those interpretive layers. I did my best to not interpret the data too much. I did categorize it into the context, but those contexts were designed by the guiding team. I used that framework as I was, publishing this data for their use. I did, of course, I was the one coding the data. So there is a little bit of an interpretive layer because I am the one ultimately that looks at the transcript and says, is this in or is this out? And what does that mean? But they have access. I also gave them access to all the raw data, so they could go and do it themselves as well. They have access to my code book. And when we're in the room, we had so much granular data that I knew that I sufficiently controlled for my own intermediation and interpretive layer. And same too, we said, we don't want to just give this to a small team of a director and a project manager who then is going to compile it down to a page or two. And that was one of the things that we noticed when we asked them, why hasn't change happened before? You've known about these problems. Why haven't it happened before? Well, it's because a lot of the leaders felt very, very far away from that interpretive data, from that raw data. When you have a college chancellor and a VP in a room, and you have a recording of a school counselor saying, this college's process is awful, 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 that is going to help you move things along from a change management perspective, rather than going and saying, hey, we talked to 17 counselors and 5 parents, and there's real issues with this, and here are some of the issues, and we want to go fix these issues, right? You're removing the humanity out of things. So I really want to encourage you all to disintermediate the decision makers from the raw data and reduce the amount of interpretive layers. And if you're in a position to hire a consultant or an evaluator, I also hope you hold them accountable to these kinds of principles, because this is really where systems building work is actually happening. So those, I think, are particularly important. So then we go back to the process, and where are we at? Now we are ready to do some co-creation. And I'm going to go through this part really quickly. One of the significant shifts, as I already mentioned, is that they had to focus on the intrinsic relationship. Historically, they thought the relationship was between them and the student, but they realized we need to create a better relationship between us and our counselors. And so we use a tool for this to really help folks focus on the intrinsic relationship that this particular system was set up in. This is our intrinsic relationship tool. On the corners of it, you have the beneficiaries, the providers, and the leaders of this particular system. And in the middle, you have intrinsic relationships, that exist between the providers and beneficiaries. You have a relationship between the leaders and the providers, and that's where systems redesign can happen to make sure you create opportunities for those two to communicate. And of course, you address power dynamics by readjusting relationships between leaders and the beneficiaries themselves. The interpretive layer of this that I brought to the Northeast College folks is saying, okay, you have students, you have counselors, and then you have the college itself. And we wanted to focus on this intrinsic relationship over here. How can Northeast College strengthen the relationship between counselor and student? That was the question. The question shifted from how do we get more students to enroll in the college to how can we at Northeast College improve the relationship between counselor and student? Then they're also asking themselves, how do we continue to redesign our processes by strengthening our relationship as a college with our counselors? That's where the guiding team, having a process, doing iteration comes in. And how do we work with Northeast College and students to create more agency for students to understand what it is they want to do? They have a big labor demand for utility linemen up in northern Nebraska, and yet those programs were not being really enrolled in. Why? Well, students don't really want to be utility linemen at the moment. So we needed to figure out some of these issues of saying, okay, how do you actually get this kind of power dynamic and create more agency? How can leaders distribute more power to students themselves to create that agency? Similarly, that goes back to the question of how do you help students create the agency to say, yes, I'm an early college student, even if my school counselor has some doubts on that. So Northeast was then pressed. So you can see we're working on the sides of this triangle here. And that was a major shift for their thinking. Because traditional thinking is, hey, I'm the college, I want to support a student, and that's all I'm going to do. But now they're focusing on the 3 sides of this triangle rather than just one particular beneficiary organization. And so with that, we offer them our co-creation funnel. It's a very, very simple tool. The very top of it is all brainstorming. What is all the possible things? So once again, we got that room full of about 50 people or so. They had all this data. We've been together. What are all the brainstorming things that we could possibly do? We repurpose some of those original stickies from that first poster we talked about. And then we organize them and say, okay, what are things we do very quickly? How do we achieve quick wins? What are some things we want to test out as pilots? This might work, this might not work. Let's try it out. And what are some longer term system changes we want to do? And so we broke teams out again, and voila, gave them some stickies, gave them some time. They went through this whole process. It's kind of a 3-stage process: brainstorm, categorize, and then prioritize. And so you're just seeing some of the things that they have decided they kind of, want to do. Assigning specific coaches and contacts for students or schools. Let's hire more navigators. On the long-term side of things, how do we fix account claiming? That's going to take a little bit of time because there's different cybersecurity things. Is there another way for us to deal with 2-factor authentication, right? So those we know are going to be some system changes. And what are some things that we want to test out? How do we reorganize our navigators? And so again, like I told you, this is a very big project. It's still going on. And in fact, they're still doing cycling. And so I just asked them actually earlier this week, I said, hey, just give me an update. What are you guys up to? And they said, Dakota, it's funny you asked because we were just talking to an evaluator and they said, oh gosh, how have you guys made such progress in such a short time? And they pointed to the process that they're using, the stakeholder engagement process. And so a couple of things. One, they expanded their staff. They went from a 1-person department. There was 1 person at this whole college responsible for the entire early college program. Now they have 5 FTE. They're currently hiring. There's an application out there about to make an offer to their 3rd navigator. So a huge growth in a very short amount of time. We're talking about 14 months. 14 months from when we started this to this particular slide. They've launched a new application. So all those process issues that they kept hearing about how their application wasn't working, they have a new application now. And yes, there are still some challenges. The claiming account thing they're still working through, but this new application really is more designed just for early college rather than routing students through their normal application process, which is what they were doing before. They launched a ticketing system. They kind of had one before, but it wasn't really working. So now it doesn't put the onus on a school counselor to navigate the college. The counselor can say, open up a ticket, and it contacts multiple departments at once. It reduces phone calls. And most importantly, it reduces giving counselors a runaround, right? And it reduces the need for a counselor. Oh, that's actually over in IT. That's actually an academic advising question. That's a financial aid question. And it also has reduced the amount of time it takes to address their issues. And then they're continuing to use and expand the stakeholder engagement process. It's a cycle for a reason. Once you've gone around it, you just keep going around it again and again. So they've expanded relationship with schools and continued to bust other barriers. Here's a direct quote from their lead. Literally, this is straight from the email I got a couple days ago. They continue to focus on stakeholder engagement. They've had meetings with counselor and admins. They had more specific conversations with one of their extended campus locations and are finally moving the needle with some of our students with the highest need. We have formed a very solid partnership with the alternative school and are getting some of their students into early college for the very first time. And we're also going to have some of their students dually enrolled and completing the welding diploma with us during their senior year. It took some time, but we've been able to eliminate one barrier after another that was preventing students from being able to enroll. For instance, Nebraska requires students to take government, so they weren't able to come for welding if it meant missing government class. So now we'll be offering a section of dual credit government on site for welding students. Early college students can't get financial aid, so they weren't able to pay for the books and welding supplies, which is about $1,500 a student. So they're working with the high school to buy the books because they have money to buy books and check them out to students. And industry partners are donating tools and supplies. Now, all of this, I know it sounds, mundane in some ways, but I look at it from the perspective that together they've been able to bust one barrier after another because they're using a methodical process. Right? They're really getting into that process saying, well, what are we doing? Let's check this one thing. And they're creating that strong partnership will among each other. And so I'm going to pause here. We have about 10 minutes left. I told you there's a lot of content. I'm going to go fast and slow. There's a lot of depth to this, so I'm happy to answer any questions. If you're searching for questions to ask, I have a couple here that I'll pose. If there's anything that stood out to you about how they work together, how do they really use context as an important factor addressing the issue, and what could we actually learn from folks? I'm going to leave this up here too in case anyone wants to grab. Well, actually, this doesn't have oh, there it is. My email's on there as well. But